Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Lotos-Eaters and I'm an assistant professor in the Amity School of Languages, Amity University, Chhattisgarh. And today we are going to start a new poem. So before this, we have already had 5 sessions on Ulysses by Lord Alfred Tennyson. Today we are going to start a new poem by the same person, Lord Alfred Tennyson, and the name of the poem is The Lotos-Eaters. Now see, the good thing about having a long discussion on Ulysses is that a lot of things will be common between the Lotos-Eaters and Ulysses. So what are the things that are common between the two poems? Let's figure that out first. Number one, the poet is the same. And so if you want to know about the poet and the age and the relationship between the poet and the age and the poet and the queen, then you can go on to the video, which will be somewhere around here. It will be linked here. So we have that, the poet. So Lord Alfred Tennyson was a very favorite poet of the Queen Victoria herself, and he was a very celebrated poet of the time. From 1850s, he became from 1850 basically, he became the poet laureate of England, and he is known for a huge chunk of poetry. And his masterpiece is In Memoriam, which he wrote in memory of his friend Arthur Henry Hallam, who passed away in 1833. If we remember, then it was in 1833 that Tennyson wrote the poem Ulysses as well, and it was more like an immediate response to the death of his friend. But Ulysses was not published in 1833, it was published in 1842 when his second volume of poems came out. The first volume of poems by Tennyson came out in 1832. And it was in this volume that we find the Lotos-Eaters. Now see, the Lotos-Eaters is a poem which was written by Tennyson when Tennyson was quite young. So he had not yet explored himself in the art of poetry, but he was pretty good, since we know that his poems, they were award-winning poems. He got a prize for the poem Timbuktu, and that was much before 1832, in 1829, if I'm not wrong. Yes, so in 1832 he published his first volume of poetry, in which we find the Lotos-Eaters. But the Lotos-Eaters is not the only poem which is interesting in this volume. But before that, so what are the things that are common? Number one, the poet. Number two, the age itself, Victorian age. Number three, which is common, is the source from which the content of this poem has been taken. Now see, in Ulysses, the source was Iliad, right? It was the epic Iliad by Homer. It was Iliad and it was Odyssey as well. Well, Odyssey because the character Ulysses is Odysseus. And we had another source, that is Dante. But here we don't have Dante, and Iliad is mentioned, but we do not have Iliad as a source. So the source of the Lotos-Eaters, the story behind the Lotos-Eaters, it comes from the Odyssey, written by Homer. Now see, in the Odyssey, there are 24 books. It is an epic after all, right? So it is an epic, and in this epic there are 24 books. And among the 24 books, in book 9, we have mention of the Lotos-Eaters. But before that, what is the deal with the Odyssey? What exactly happens in the Odyssey? Unlike the Iliad, which has a large spanning story, and there are a lot of factions that war with each other, and they war with the gods as well. In Odyssey, it is a journey. It is a journey of Ulysses and his crewmates back from Troy, where they have just finished the war, to Ithaca, which is their homeland. So they are going from Troy to Ithaca. And this journey is Odyssey. In between the journey, they face a lot of troubles. They face a lot of challenges. And these challenges are what make up the epic. These challenges are what make the epic interesting. One of these challenges was the land of the Lotos-Eaters. So what happened in this land of the Lotos-Eaters? In the land of the Lotos-Eaters, you had a number of very small people. I mean, they were not really that big. They were really tiny people, and they looked very melancholy. You'll get to know more about how they look and how they are in the poem itself. But in the epics, they came across an island in which lived these Lotos-Eaters. Why are they the Lotos-Eaters? Because they ate the fruits of a plant called lotos. Now see, this is not lotus. Like, I have seen a lot of people making a confusion, calling it lotus, but it is not lotus, people. Do not make this mistake. It is lotos. It looks a lot like the lotus because the source from which it has been taken is probably the lotus itself, but for the sake of the myth, it is a lotos. And what is this lotos? What happens when you eat the lotos? It is very similar to what happens when you eat or when you consume opium. I'm sorry, I got the spelling wrong there. So opium, it is an intoxicant. It kills all activity in your mind, and you just want to stay in that one spot and remain there for the rest of your life. It removes your urge to live and to go beyond the utmost bound of human thought. So see, what happens here is that this as a poem is the very opposite of Ulysses. In Ulysses, the poem. In Ulysses wants to go out on the last journey. He is tired of staying in his homeland, in the one place that he is, and he just wants to go out of there. In this poem, they have come to the land of the Lotos-Eaters and they want to stay there. They don't want to travel anymore. They don't want to go out anymore. So in the epics, what happens is that some of the sailors who ate the flower of the lotus, they got intoxicated and they just would not leave the island. It was Ulysses who had to tie them with a rope and pull them into the boat out of the island. Otherwise, well, Ulysses would still be on the island with Lotos-Eaters. And it is a very interesting tale because we see this idea of intoxication in various aspects of our present day life as well. And this is not just about drugs. Now, this is a drug in a way, definitely, but it is also about other kinds of entrapments, other kinds of what we in Hindi know as Maya. And this poem is all about that Maya. It is all about those entrapments, and more than that, obviously. But that's the basic stuff in it. So now we know that what is common is the poet, the age in which the poet is. Obviously, what is common is the source, that is the Odyssey, from which this has been taken in book 9 of the Odyssey. What is also common is the verse structure, which we find here. So you would find all the lines in this poem to be in iambic pentameter. Now you know what iambic pentameter is. We have discussed it in one of the sessions and I'll put a link up here to it. So the iambic pentameter is the major meter which is followed here, and probably one reason why it is done is because the iambic pentameter sets the tone for a very serious thing happening. So there we have all the common things. Now let's discuss some of the uncommon things that we have in the Lotos-Eaters, which is not so similar with Ulysses. So the first thing which is not so similar with the Ulysses is the form of the poem. So the verse structure is iambic, but it is not a blank verse. It is not a blank verse. In fact, there are various sections, we'll discuss that. There are various sections which have different kinds of verse, although all of them are in iambic. They are all in iambic, but they are not in blank verse. Okay, so the serious tone, it stays throughout. The form of the earlier poem was dramatic monologue. In here we don't have a monologue. What we have here is the first part is spoken by the poet. So here let's discuss the structure, because the structure is a primary area of difference from Ulysses. This poem has a clear-cut structure, unlike Ulysses. Ulysses doesn't have a structure. We gave it a structure to make it easy. But this poem has a structure, and Tennyson has given it a structure. So the first 5 stanzas in the poem are introductory, and they are spoken, at least the beginning of it is, they are spoken by the narrator, and the narrator describes the scenery, the narrator describes the kind of place they are in, the kind of people they are seeing, the kind of different beautiful or not so beautiful but spooky elements out there, and about the mentality of the mariners, of the sailors as they see the island. So that is what is discussed in the first 5 stanzas, and in here you'll find iambic meter mostly. In the next 8 stanzas we find what Tennyson would call the choric song. So the first 5 stanzas are introductory, and the next 8 stanzas constitute choric songs. 8 choric songs. What is a choric song? The word choric comes from the word chorus. What do you mean by chorus? A chorus is something which is meant to be sung together. Lines which are meant to be sung together. So the mariners have come on the island, and they have taken, not all of them, some of them have taken the fruit of lotos, and now they are intoxicated, and they don't want to leave. So they justify why they want to stay in this place, and they sing a song. They sing a song together. So it's not a monologue. Everyone is speaking together. It seems it could have been a monologue if one speaker would have spoken it, but otherwise it's not, because there are a lot of speakers and they are all singing the song together. So it's a chorus. It goes on for 8 stanzas where they justify why they better be there, why they need not go back home, and how the journey itself is so tiring. So that is the structure of the poem, which is very different from Ulysses. Now, the poetic form is not dramatic monologue. It is completely different. It is not a blank verse. It is in iambic though. So now we have understood what are some of the similarities, and thankfully, because we have had the sessions on Ulysses, I'll make sure that you can get to see all of them. You can find them, and then you'll be able to connect these 2 poems, Ulysses with the Lotos-Eaters. Now, we have also known what are the dissimilarities between the 2, Ulysses and Lotos-Eaters, and that is in the form of it, and that is in the structure itself. Now, let's get into a little bit of the background before we end today's session. So, a little bit about the background to the poem, how this was conceived. It was in 1829 that Tennyson went with Arthur Henry Hallam, his dear old friend, to northern Spain. And on this journey was inspired it inspired in him some emotions. And these emotions gave birth to a few very famous poems. Poems like Oinon. I'm not sure if Oinon should be how it should be pronounced, but let's say it is Oinon. We had the Lotos-Eaters, and we had Mariana in the south. So these are the three poems, Lotos-Eaters, Oinon, and Mariana in the south, which are classic in the 1832 volume called Poems. And we also know that Tennyson came up with the next volume in 1842. That is the second volume of Poems. And in this we find Ulysses, which was written in 1833. So this period for Tennyson, it was going to be a very difficult period because he would lose his friend very soon. When he wrote this poem, it was much in a very childish humor, in a very it's like he had read Odyssey. He knew the story of Odyssey, but he wanted to imagine how exactly would the sailors think, because that is not discussed in detail in the epic. So how would the sailors feel? What would the sailors say when they reach the land of the Lotos-Eaters? So a scholar is trying to ask these questions. Tennyson was a scholar, obviously. He is trying to ask these questions, and he is trying to answer these questions through his poem. So if you want to find out whether there was any relationship with the present day England, sure, there were, and we'll discuss those also. But what is more important is maybe the way it is connected to present day Victorian England is not as important as the fact that he just wanted to give voice to these sailors. And I think one last thing for this session would be that since this poem is not in blank verse, it has a rhyme pattern. At least the first 5 stanzas have a rhyming pattern. After that, the rhyming pattern gets jumbled a lot. So you'd be able to see the first few lines of the poem, which begins with courage, and then it goes on. So it's a very iconic beginning, and you would see that the words which come in the first stanza itself, they end with land soon, land moon. I'm sorry, did I go right? Land soon, land noon, and then swoon, dream, moon, stream, and sing. So you can clearly see that if land is A, soon is B, land is again A, noon is B, swoon is B, dream is C, moon is B, stream is C, seam is C. So we have a rhyming pattern of A, B, B, C, B, C, C. So 9 lines in all the 5 stanzas with rhyming pattern of A, B, C, B, C, C. That's how it goes. It's pretty much regular throughout, and in the chorus section, the chorus songs, the choric songs, it's very irregular because even the line lengths vary. It begins with 9 lines, and then it goes to 10 lines, and then 12 lines, and then 14 lines. The last one is huge. It is 29 lines. So the choric song also keeps expanding. So throughout the poem, which we'll discuss in the next session, you will feel this sense of drowsiness, this sense of time being elongated. So that is it for today. And I hope that you got to understand the differences between the two poems. In the next class, we will be discussing the poem in detail. So thank you so much and see you again in the next video.